Maid overhears plan to take mother-in-law's inheritance and warns her not to sign. Clara Marie Miller never imagined that one day her life would turn into something so complicated. She was just a housekeeper who had been working for 4 years in the home of Mrs. Margaret Mitchell, a 75-year-old lady who lived in a quiet neighborhood in Chicago's Lincoln Park. What started as an ordinary job would become the most difficult and frightening experience she had ever faced. That Thursday afternoon began like any other. Clara was in the hallway on the second floor, organizing the towels in the linen closet, when she heard voices coming from the study. The door was slightly ajar, just a crack, but enough for the words to reach her with disturbing clarity. "We need to do this soon, Christopher. Your mother is getting more confused by the day," said Vanessa's voice, Mrs. Margaret Mitchell's daughter-in-law. Clara stopped what she was doing. Her heart began to beat faster. She knew she shouldn't listen, but something in the urgency of that voice made her stay there, frozen, still holding the towels. "I know, honey, but we have to be careful. If anyone gets suspicious," replied Christopher, Mrs. Margaret Mitchell's only son. "Suspicious of what? She barely knows her own name sometimes. The papers are ready. We just need her to sign." Clara felt the blood run cold in her veins. "Papers? Make Mrs. Margaret Mitchell sign what?" "And if the maid notices something?" asked Christopher, lowering his voice even more. "Her? Please, she's just a housekeeper, Christopher. No education, can barely read. Even if she does notice, who's going to believe her over us?" Vanessa's words cut Clara like blades. She clutched the towels to her chest, feeling a mix of anger and fear churning inside her. How dare they talk like that? How dare they plot against Mrs. Margaret Mitchell, that kind lady who had always treated her with respect? "Once she signs the power of attorney, we'll have access to everything," Vanessa continued. "The bank accounts, the properties, the investments. And with her mental state, no one will question when we start making the transfers." "Transfers? Vanessa, that's too risky." "Risky is continuing to live in this tiny apartment while your mother has millions sitting in the bank. Christopher, you're the only child. That money is yours by right." "But she's still alive." "And she'll stay alive. We're just securing what's ours before she does something foolish and donates it all to that nursing home." Clara had to lean against the wall. Her legs were trembling so much she thought she might fall. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell often mentioned an assisted living facility she supported financially, a place where people without families could spend their final years with dignity. Was she planning to leave part of her inheritance there? "The documents Nathaniel prepared are perfect," said Christopher, and Clara realized he was giving in. "He assured me everything is legal. Technically, we're just taking over management of her assets due to dementia." "Exactly. And when she passes, we'll have everything arranged so there are no issues with taxes or red tape." Clara couldn't hear anymore. With shaky legs, she moved away as quietly as possible, went down the stairs, and headed straight to the utility room. She sat on the little stool where she usually folded clothes and let the towels fall to the floor. What should she do? Tell Mrs. Margaret Mitchell. But what if the lady really had dementia like they said? What if she didn't understand? Even worse, what if Clara lost her job for sticking her nose where it didn't belong? She needed that job. She was a single mother of 2 children, Ethan Miller, 12, and Mia Miller, 8. The salary Mrs. Margaret Mitchell paid was the only support for her family. If she lost the job, she wouldn't know how to pay the rent on the shack where they lived in the Harvey neighborhood. But how could I stay quiet knowing they were planning to rob an elderly woman? Because it was robbery, no matter how many pretty papers they had. Mrs. Mitchell trusted her son, and he was betraying that trust in the worst possible way. Clara sat there for a few minutes, trying to organize her thoughts. She needed to think clearly, decide what to do. But before she could reach any conclusion, she heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Quickly, she picked up the towels from the floor and pretended to be folding them when Christopher appeared at the door of the service area. "Clara, you there?" "Yes, Mr. Mitchell," she replied without looking up. "My wife and I are going out. We're having dinner out tonight." "Yes, sir." "And look, don't bother making dinner for my mother either. She said she's not hungry, so just let her rest." Clara finally looked at him. Christopher was about 40 with graying hair and always wore expensive clothes. At that moment he was wearing a light-colored shirt from an imported brand. His face had an expression she couldn't decipher. Was there guilt there, or just the indifference of someone who had already made a decision? "Mr. Mitchell, may I ask a question?" He seemed surprised. "Sure. How is Mrs. Mitchell? She's been so quiet lately." Christopher looked away. "Oh, you know, age is catching up. The doctor said these memory lapses are normal." "But is she being well cared for, taking her medication properly?" "Why so many questions, Clara?" His voice grew harder. "Are you questioning how we take care of my mother?" "No, sir, sorry, it's just that I worry about her." "Worry about doing your job. The rest is none of your business." He turned and left, leaving Clara with an even tighter heart. She was sure now. She had to do something. She waited until she heard the front door close, the sound of the elevator, and then ran to the living room window to see Christopher's car leaving the building. Only then did she go up the stairs toward Mrs. Mitchell's room. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us beginners. Now continuing. The bedroom door was closed. Clara knocked softly. "Mrs. Mitchell, may I come in?" There was no answer. She knocked again, this time a little harder. "Mrs. Mitchell." Silence. Fear began to grip Clara's chest. What if they had done something to her? What if... She slowly turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. The room was dim, with only a sliver of light coming through the gap in the heavy curtains. It took a few seconds for Clara's eyes to adjust. Mrs. Mitchell was sitting in an armchair near the window, so still that for a terrible moment Clara thought she wasn't breathing. But then the old woman turned her face toward the door. "Clara, is that you?" "Yes, Mrs. Mitchell. I came to see if you need anything." "You can turn on the light, my dear." Clara obeyed. The light revealed the large, well-decorated room with antique dark wood furniture and a Persian rug that Clara carefully cleaned every week. And it also revealed Mrs. Mitchell sitting upright in the armchair, her white hair pinned up in an impeccable bun, wearing a beige linen suit. What struck Clara most, however, were the old woman's eyes, bright, alert, completely lucid. There was no confusion there, no sign of the so-called dementia that Christopher and Vanessa mentioned. "Sit here, Clara," said Mrs. Mitchell, pointing to the bed. "You seem upset. Did something happen?" Clara hesitated. This was the moment. She could tell everything, or she could pretend she knew nothing and go on with her life. But looking at that woman who had always been so good to her, who paid her salary on time, who gave her a birthday present, who asked about her children, she couldn't stay quiet. "Mrs. Margaret Mitchell, I need to tell you something, but I'm afraid of losing my job." The older woman tilted her head, studying Clara's face. "If it's something important, you can speak without fear. I won't fire you for telling the truth." Clara took a deep breath and told everything. The voices in the office, the conversation about the papers, the power of attorney, the plan to take control of the estate. She spoke quickly, the words tripping over each other, expecting at any moment to see shock or despair on Mrs. Margaret Mitchell's face. But to her surprise, the woman just nodded calmly, as if it were nothing new. "Thank you for telling me, Clara. You're a good girl." You're not surprised, Mrs.?" Margaret Mitchell gave a sad smile. "No, my dear, I already suspected. But then, why don't you do something? Why do you let them keep going with this plan?" The woman stood up from the armchair with some difficulty. Clara automatically stood to help her, but Mrs. Margaret Mitchell made a gesture for her to stay seated. "Because sometimes, Clara, we need to see how far people will go before taking action. I raised my son. I gave him everything. I paid for the best schools, college, helped when he got married. And now I need to know if all that investment was worth it, or if I raised a man capable of robbing his own mother." "But it's dangerous, Mrs. Margaret Mitchell. What if they manage to get you to sign those papers?" "They won't manage, don't worry." She went to the dresser and opened a drawer, from which she took a folder. "Come here, let me show you something." Clara approached. Inside the folder were documents, many documents, all with notary stamps and signatures. "This is my will, Clara. I made it 3 months ago when I started to notice that my son and daughter-in-law were acting strangely. I sought out a lawyer I trust, someone neither Christopher nor Vanessa knows. What does this will say? That Christopher will receive only 20% of the inheritance. The rest will be divided among some causes that have always been important to me and, she paused, someone he doesn't know exists. Clara's eyes widened. What do you mean, Mrs. Margaret Mitchell? The woman returned to the armchair and signaled for Clara to sit back down on the bed. It's a long story, my dear. A story I kept to myself for many years because it was easier to pretend it never happened. But now, seeing what my son is doing, I realized I can no longer ignore the past. Clara listened in silence, trying to process all that information. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell had someone else to leave an inheritance to. Who? I had a relationship before I married Christopher's father, began Mrs. Margaret Mitchell, her voice growing distant, as if she were going back in time. I was very young, only 19. His name was Caleb James, and he was the most handsome and sweetest man I'd ever met. We fell madly in love, the kind that only happens when you're young and believe love can conquer everything. What happened? My parents didn't approve. Caleb was poor, worked as a mechanic, and my family had money and social standing. They thought I deserved better. But I didn't care about that. I wanted to be with him, to build a simple but happy life. Were you together? For a while. And then, Mrs. Margaret Mitchell's voice faltered. Then I found out I was expecting his baby. Clara brought her hand to her mouth, beginning to understand where this story was going. My parents were furious. They sent me away to a relative's farm in the countryside. They said it was for my protection, but really it was so no one would find out about the pregnancy. And they forbade Caleb James from seeing me. He tried, Clara. He tried very hard to find me, but my father had influence, paid people to keep him away. And the baby? Mrs. Mitchell closed her eyes, and Clara saw a tear run down her wrinkled face. I had a girl. Beautiful. Perfect. But as soon as she was born, they took her from my arms. They said it was better that way, that she would have a good family, that it would be better for everyone. I had just given birth. I was weak, confused. I didn't have the strength to fight. Oh, Mrs. Mitchell. I went back to Chicago a few months later. My parents had arranged a marriage for me with a businessman, Charles Mitchell, Christopher's father. He knew my story, but he didn't care. He needed a wife from a good family, and I needed respectability. We got married. I had Christopher. I lived my life. But never, not a single day did I stop thinking about that girl. Clara was emotional but also confused. And do you know what happened to her? For many years, no. I didn't even know the name they had given her. But 6 months ago, she found me. Mrs. Mitchell smiled through her tears. Through those DNA tests they do nowadays. She put her DNA on a website, looking for her biological family, and a match came up with me. Her name is Teresa. Teresa Ann Higgins. And have you talked to her? We've talked a lot. By phone, by letter. We even met twice at a cafe far from here. She's a teacher, 52 years old, married, with 3 children. And she's a wonderful woman, Clara. She's kind, honest, hard-working. Everything I hoped my child would be. Christopher doesn't know about her? No. Charles, my late husband, always thought it was better not to tell him. He said it would complicate things, cause problems. And I accepted it because it was easier. But now, seeing what Christopher is doing, I realize I was wrong. Teresa deserves to know her brother, deserves her share of the inheritance, deserves to know that I thought of her all these years. Clara was silent for a moment, processing everything. So in the will? In the will, Teresa receives 40%. Another 30% goes to the assisted living facility I've always helped. 10% for you, Clara. For me. Clara almost fell out of bed. But Mrs. Mitchell, I can't accept. Yes, you can. You've worked for me for 4 years. You've always been honest, careful, respectful. And today you proved you're the only person in this house who really cares about me. That money will secure your children's future. And Christopher? Christopher receives 20%. That's more than enough, more than he deserves after what he's planning to do. If he had been a good son, if he had respected me, he would have received much more, but he chose the path of greed. Clara didn't know what to say. It was all so surreal. Less than an hour ago, her biggest concern was losing her job. Now she found out not only was she not losing her job, but she was in her employer's will. Mrs. Mitchell, but what if they keep pushing those papers? That power of attorney. Let them push, I'll keep pretending I'm confused, that I don't understand anything. And when they bring the documents, I'll say I need to think, that I need to talk to my lawyer. I'll stall until they give up or until they do something so serious that I have no choice but to confront them. But that's dangerous. It is. But it has to be this way, Clara. I need to see with my own eyes how far my son is willing to go. I need to be sure before I take any final action. Clara shook her head, still processing everything. And me? What should I do? Keep working normally. Don't let them suspect you know anything. And tell me everything you hear, everything that happens. You are my eyes and ears in this house, Clara. I trust you. You can count on me, Mrs. Mitchell. I won't let you down, ma'am. The two women exchanged a knowing look. There, in that room, an alliance was being born that would change the fate of everyone in that house. Over the next few days, Clara went about her usual routine. She cleaned the house, prepared meals, took care of the laundry. But she was always alert, always watching. And what she saw wasn't good at all. Christopher and Vanessa spent hours locked in the office. When they came out, they spoke in hushed tones, stopping their conversation whenever Clara appeared. She knew they were planning their next move. Vanessa started showing up at the house more often. Before, she only came on weekends, but now she was there almost every day. And whenever she came, she brought something. A cake, flowers, a magazine, small gestures that seemed affectionate, but Clara knew they had a purpose. "Look, mother-in-law, I brought that cake you love so much," Vanessa would say in a syrupy voice. "Remember when we used to eat this together?" Mrs. Margaret Mitchell would smile and thank her, but later, when they were alone, she would make a face. "She thinks I'm stupid," she muttered. "She thinks she can win me over with cake." Clara couldn't help but feel angry at Vanessa. The woman wore a tight red dress, always made up, always with her hair done. She looked like an actress trying to play the part of the devoted daughter-in-law, but failing miserably. It was on a Friday, almost 2 weeks after their first conversation, that things started to get more serious. Clara was cleaning the bathroom of Christopher and Vanessa's suite when she heard voices from the bedroom. "Nathaniel said everything is ready," Christopher was saying. "The documents arrived in the mail today." "Perfect?" asked Vanessa. "Perfect. The power of attorney gives full authority to manage all her assets. And there's a clause stating that in case of mental incapacity, we automatically assume total control." How much did it cost? 15,000. But worth every penny. Nathaniel knows the procedures, knows how to make these things look legitimate. Clara stopped scrubbing the sink. $15,000. They spent $15,000 to forge documents. And when are we going to make her sign? Tomorrow. I'll tell her it's Social Security papers that she needs to sign to keep receiving the benefit. She'll sign without even reading. Are you sure? Absolutely. My mother can barely read these days, Vanessa. She won't even look at what she's signing. The sound of a drawer opening was heard. "Look here, they're all together. Power of attorney, bank authorization, asset transfer. As soon as she signs, we start moving the money." "Where are we transferring first?" "To that account we opened in the Cayman Islands. Tax-free, untraceable, and then—" Vanessa laughed. "And then we're going to Europe. That apartment in Lisbon we saw, remember, we'll buy it in cash." "Easy, Vanessa. First we need to make sure everything is done right. We can't raise suspicion." "Suspicion about whom?" "She's senile, Christopher. No one will question anything." Clara had heard enough. Heart pounding, she finished cleaning quickly and went downstairs. She needed to warn Mrs. Mitchell immediately. She found the older woman in the kitchen, having tea. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to speak with you urgently." They went to the ladies' room and Clara told her everything she had heard. "Tomorrow?" Mrs. Mitchell turned pale. "They're going to try tomorrow?" "Yes. And Mrs. Mitchell, they paid $15,000 to a man named Nathaniel to forge the documents. This is serious. Very serious." Mrs. Mitchell was silent for a long moment. "Clara, I need you to do something for me." "Anything?" "Tomorrow, when they bring the papers, I want you to be nearby. But hidden, where they can't see you, and I want you to record everything on your phone." "Record?" "Yes, the conversation, the attempt to make me sign, everything. We need proof of what they're doing. Otherwise, they could later say I signed willingly." "But Mrs. Mitchell, they said there are accounts in strange places, that they're going to transfer the money. You shouldn't call—" "No, Clara, we're not calling anyone yet. I need to see this with my own eyes. I need to see my son trying to deceive me. Only then will I take action." Clara didn't like that, but she understood. Mrs. Mitchell needed that confirmation, no matter how painful it was. The next day, Saturday, Clara woke up earlier than usual. Her stomach was tied in knots from nervousness. She had lain awake all night thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if Christopher and Vanessa found out she was recording? What if her cell phone failed? What if Mrs. Mitchell, at the critical moment, actually signed the papers? She arrived at the house at 8 in the morning, earlier than her normal time. Mrs. Mitchell was already awake, dressed in a silk robe, having coffee in the kitchen. "Good morning, Clara," she said with a trembling voice. It was clear she was also nervous. "Good morning, Mrs. Mitchell. Did you sleep well?" "Not much, but let's do what needs to be done." Christopher and Vanessa came down for breakfast around 9:30. He was wearing a light-colored shirt, she a tight dress. Both had expressions of people about to do something important. "Good morning, Mom," Christopher said, kissing Mrs. Mitchell on the cheek. "Good morning, son." "Mom, I need to talk to you after breakfast about some important papers." "What papers, son?" "They're Social Security documents. Nothing major, but you need to sign today so you don't lose the benefit." Mrs. Mitchell nodded slowly as if confused. "Oh yes, the benefit." Clara served the coffee in silence, every movement measured. She had prepared her cell phone, hidden in her uniform pocket, already set to record. After breakfast, Christopher led Mrs. Mitchell to the living room. Vanessa followed, carrying a leather folder. "Clara, you can go tidy up the rooms," Christopher said without looking at her. "Yes, sir." But instead of going upstairs, Clara stayed in the hallway, just outside the living room. The door was closed, but she could hear everything. She took the cell phone out of her pocket, activated the recording, and hid it on a small table near the door, behind a flower vase. With luck, the audio would be captured. "So, Mom, these are the documents," Christopher said. "You just need to sign here, here, and here." "What are these papers?" asked Mrs. Mitchell, and Clara noticed she was pretending to be more confused than she actually was. "They're from Social Security, Mum, so you can keep receiving your benefit." "But I don't receive a benefit." There was a tense silence. "Mum, you're forgetting. Of course you receive it." "I do?" "Yes. Look, it's better not to overthink this. Just sign here and everything will be fine." "But let me read it first." "There's no need to read it, Mum. It's all standard. Bureaucratic stuff." "Still, I want to read it." Clara heard the sound of paper being turned. "This isn't from Social Security, Christopher," said Mrs. Mitchell, and her voice was now different, firmer. "This is a power of attorney." "It is, Mum. Power of attorney for the benefit. Don't lie to me. It says here clearly, power of attorney for asset management, transfer of property. What is this?" "Mom, you're confused." "I am not confused. I know very well what I'm reading. You're trying to trick me." Mrs. Mitchell's voice had risen. Clara moved closer to the door, ready to intervene if necessary. "Mrs. Mitchell, please calm down," and it was Vanessa speaking now. "No one is trying to trick you." "No? Then why did you lie and say it was from Social Security?" "It was just a way of speaking," Christopher tried. "Mom, these documents are for your own good. You're no longer able to manage your finances properly. Let me handle it." "I manage my finances just fine, thank you. Mum, please, get out of my room right now." "But Mum, I said get out." The door swung open abruptly. Clara barely had time to step back. Christopher came out first, his face red with anger, followed by Vanessa, who was carrying the folder. They walked right past Clara without saying a word and went into the office, slamming the door. Clara waited a few seconds, grabbed her phone from its hiding spot, and put it in her pocket. Then she walked into the room. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell was sitting on the sofa, trembling, but when she saw Clara, she smiled. "Did you get it recorded?" "Yes, I did, Mrs. Margaret." "Great. Now we have proof, but the victory didn't last long, Marie." Because that night, everything changed in a way neither of them expected. Clara was washing the dinner dishes when she heard a loud noise from upstairs. A crash, like something heavy had fallen. She dropped the plate and ran to the stairs. Christopher and Vanessa had also heard it and were heading up. In the hallway on the second floor, near Mrs. Margaret Mitchell's room, the lady herself was lying on the floor, motionless. "Mom!" Christopher shouted, running toward her. Clara felt the world spin. No, it couldn't be. "Call an ambulance!" Vanessa yelled. "Hurry!" Christopher already had his phone in hand, dialing. Clara knelt beside Mrs. Margaret Mitchell and took her hand. "Mrs. Margaret, can you hear me?" She slowly opened her eyes. There was a purple mark on her forehead, where she had apparently hit it when she fell. "Clara," she whispered. "Dizzy. I got dizzy. Don't talk, Mrs. Margaret. The ambulance is coming." "Mrs." Margaret Mitchell squeezed Clara's hand with surprising strength and whispered something so low that only she could hear. It wasn't an accident. Clara's eyes widened, but before she could ask anything, the paramedics arrived and began examining Mrs. Margaret Mitchell. They took her to the hospital. Christopher went in the ambulance, Vanessa went in her own car, and Clara stayed in the house, alone, with those words echoing in her head. It wasn't an accident. What did Mrs. Margaret mean by that? That someone had pushed her? But who? Christopher and Vanessa were in the office when the accident happened. Clara was sure of that. Or was she? She spent the night awake, pacing through the empty house, trying to understand what had happened. Only in the morning did she get a call from Christopher, saying that Mrs. Margaret was stable but would have to stay in the hospital for a few days for observation because of the blow to her head. In the days that followed, Clara kept up the routine at the house, but she was always alert. Christopher and Vanessa went to the hospital every day, but came back with grim faces. Apparently, Mrs. Margaret Mitchell wasn't willing to talk to them. On the fourth night, Clara received a text on her phone. It was from an unknown number. "Clara, it's me, Margaret. I'm using a nurse's phone. I need you to come visit me tomorrow early, at 6 a.m., before Christopher arrives. Room 312. Come alone and don't tell anyone." Clara read the message 3 times. Was it really Mrs. Margaret? It could be a trap, but she had to take the risk. The next morning, she woke up before sunrise, left the kids still sleeping with the neighbor next door, and took 2 buses to St. Jude's Medical Center in downtown Chicago. The hospital was quiet at that hour. She went through reception without any trouble and went up to the 3rd floor. Room 312 was at the end of the hall. She knocked softly on the door. "Come in," said a weak voice. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell was in bed with machines connected to her, a bandage on her forehead, but her eyes were alert. "Clara, I'm glad you came." "Mrs. Margaret, how are you?" "Better now. Sit here. We have little time before Christopher arrives." Clara pulled up a chair. "What did you mean by that? That it wasn't an accident?" "Because it wasn't, Clara. I was pushed." "What? By whom?" "I didn't see. I was leaving the room when suddenly I felt 2 hands on my back and I fell. When I looked behind me, there was no one there. But I know someone was there." "But Mrs. Margaret, Mr. Christopher and Vanessa were downstairs." "There was someone else in the house, Clara, I'm sure of it. I heard footsteps, voices before I fell." Clara fell silent, processing that. If it was true, then Christopher and Vanessa had gotten someone to hurt Mrs. Margaret. But who? "Mrs. Margaret, what are we going to do? First, I need to get out of this hospital. The doctors want to keep me here for a few more days, but it's not safe. If they manage to push me at home, they could try something here too." "But how? The doctors won't release you. That's why I need your help. I'm going to check myself out against medical advice. But I need you to get things ready at home for when I return. That recording you made, keep it in a safe place. And call the lawyer whose number I left in my address book. Tell him we need to schedule an urgent meeting. Yes, Mrs. Margaret, but what if they try something again? Mrs. Margaret took Clara's hand. That's why you can't leave me alone anymore. I know it's a lot to ask, but I need you to stay at the house day and night until we sort this out. I'll pay overtime, whatever it takes. It's not about money, Mrs. Margaret. I'll stay, but I need to bring my children with me. Bring them. There are plenty of rooms. They'll be safe there. The two women worked out the details. Clara would leave the hospital without being seen and prepare everything. Mrs. Margaret would submit her discharge request that very afternoon against medical advice. When Clara left the hospital, the sun was already high. She was scared, but also determined. She wouldn't let anything bad happen to Mrs. Margaret. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Mrs. Margaret returned home that same day, much to Christopher's dismay. "Mom, the doctor said you need to stay in the hospital," he complained when he saw her arrive by taxi. "The doctors can say whatever they want. This is my house and this is where I'm staying." Christopher looked at Vanessa, who shrugged. It was clear they weren't happy about it. Clara brought her children that same evening. Ethan Miller, at 12 years old, was a smart and quiet boy. Mia Miller, 8 years old, was more talkative and curious. Both were impressed by the big house. "Mom, are we going to live here?" asked Mia, looking around with wide eyes. "For now, yes, sweetheart, but behave, okay? And don't touch anything that isn't ours." "Got it." Clara settled them into one of the guest rooms on the ground floor, away from Christopher, Vanessa, and Mrs. Margaret's rooms. That way, she could keep an eye on everyone. But in the days that followed, it became clear that Christopher wouldn't give up easily. He started questioning all of Mrs. Margaret's decisions. "Mom, why is the housekeeper living here? That's not appropriate." "Clara is staying because I need someone to take care of me at night. Or do you want to do it?" He backed off. "No, but we can hire a nurse." "I don't want a nurse, I want Clara." "Mom, you're being unreasonable." "This is my house, Christopher. I decide who lives here." Another argument happened when Mrs. Margaret announced she was going to change the locks on all the doors. "Change them? Why?" asked Vanessa. "Because I'll feel safer that way." "But we live here too. How are we going to get in?" "I'll give you copies of the keys, but I want to control who has access to the house." Christopher turned red with anger. "This is ridiculous. You're being paranoid. Call it what you want. The locks will be changed tomorrow." And they were. A locksmith came and changed all the locks, and Mrs. Margaret kept the extra keys with her. She only gave one copy to Christopher and one to Clara. Cristina ficou furiosa quando descobriu que não receberia uma cópia. Vanessa was furious when she found out she wouldn't get a copy. "Eu não sou de confiança agora, depois de tudo que fiz por essa família." "Am I not trustworthy now, after everything I've done for this family?" "Você não mora aqui oficialmente", respondeu Dona Helena com calma. "Quando vier, Marcelo pode abrir a porta." "You don't live here officially," Mrs. Margaret Mitchell replied calmly. "When you come, Christopher can open the door." A tensão na casa estava insuportável. The tension in the house was unbearable. Marcelo mal falava com a mãe. Christopher barely spoke to his mother. Cristina fazia questão de ignorar tanto Dona Helena quanto Joana. Vanessa made a point of ignoring both Mrs. Margaret Mitchell and Clara. E Joana tentava manter tudo funcionando normalmente, mas sentia o peso daquele ambiente pesado. And Clara tried to keep everything running normally, but she felt the weight of that heavy atmosphere. Foi numa segunda-feira, quase 3 semanas depois da queda de Dona Helena, que o advogado finalmente chegou para a reunião que ela tinha marcado. It was on a Monday, almost 3 weeks after Mrs. Margaret Mitchell's fall, that the lawyer finally arrived for the meeting she had scheduled. Seu nome era Dr. Augusto Ferreira, homem de uns 60 anos, careca, com óculos de armação grossa e uma pasta de couro surrada. His name was Dr. Arthur Bennett, a man in his 60s, bald, with thick-rimmed glasses and a worn leather briefcase. Ele chegou às 10 da manhã e foi direto para o escritório com Dona Helena. He arrived at 10 in the morning and went straight to the study with Mrs. Margaret Mitchell. Ficaram lá por mais de 2 horas. They stayed there for over 2 hours. Joanna pôde ouvir vozes abafadas, mas não conseguia distinguir o que diziam. Clara could hear muffled voices, but couldn't make out what they were saying. Marcelo também estava inquieto. Ele dava voltas pela sala, olhando para o corredor a cada 5 minutos. Christopher was restless too. He paced around the living room, glancing at the hallway every 5 minutes. Quem é esse advogado? Perguntou ele quando cruzou com Joanna na cozinha. Who is this lawyer? He asked when he ran into Clara in the kitchen. Não sei, senhor. Dona Helena que chamou. I don't know, sir. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell called him. E ela não te disse para quê? And she didn't tell you why? Não, senhor. No, sir. Ele olhou para ela com desconfiança, como se soubesse que ela estava mentindo. He looked at her suspiciously, as if he knew she was lying. Finalmente a porta do escritório se abriu. Finally, the study door opened. Dr. Augusto saiu primeiro, seguido por Dona Helena. Dr. Arthur came out first, followed by Mrs. Margaret Mitchell. Marcelo, pode vir aqui um momento? Chamou Dona Helena. Christopher, can you come here a moment? Mrs. Margaret Mitchell called. Ele foi. He went. Cristina também tentou entrar, mas Dona Helena barrou. Vanessa also tried to go in, but Mrs. Margaret Mitchell blocked the way. É uma conversa entre mãe e filho. This is a conversation between mother and son. Mas eu sou esposa dele. But I'm his wife. E essa conversa não diz respeito a você. And this conversation doesn't concern you. A porta se fechou. The door closed. Cristina ficou do lado de fora, claramente irritada. Vanessa stood outside, clearly annoyed. Dentro do escritório, Marcelo ouviu coisas que ele nunca imaginaria ouvir. Inside the study, Christopher heard things he never imagined he would hear. O que é isso, mãe? Sua voz saiu alta o suficiente para Joanna ouvir do corredor. What is this, Mom? His voice was loud enough for Clara to hear from the hallway. Eu tenho uma irmã? Como assim você teve outro filho? I have a sister. What do you mean you had another child? A resposta de Dona Helena foi mais baixa, inaudível. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell's answer was lower, inaudible. 52 anos e a senhora nunca contou? 52 years, and you never told me. Mais murmúrios. More murmurs. E ela está no testamento, recebendo 40%. And she's in the will, getting 40%. A voz de Marcelo estava ficando cada vez mais alta, mais desesperada. Christopher's voice was getting louder and more desperate. E eu? Quanto eu recebo? And me? How much do I get? Silêncio. Silence. 20%? 20% é só isso? Depois de tudo? Depois de ter cuidado da senhora todos esses anos? 20%. 20% is all, after everything. After taking care of you all these years. Você não cuidou de mim, Marcelo. Você tentou me roubar. You didn't take care of me, Christopher. You tried to steal from me. A porta se abriu violentamente. The door flew open violently. Marcelo saiu com o rosto transtornado. Christopher came out with a distraught face. Você, ele apontou para Joanna. Tudo isso é culpa sua. Você colocou essas ideias na cabeça da minha mãe. You, he pointed at Clara. This is all your fault. You put these ideas in my mother's head. Senhor Marcelo, eu não... Mr. Christopher, I didn't... Cala a boca, você não passa de uma empregada. Não tem direito de se meter nos assuntos da minha família. Shut up. You're nothing but a maid. You have no right to meddle in my family's affairs. Marcelo, não fale assim com a Joanna, disse Dona Helena saindo do escritório. Christopher, don't talk to Clara like that, said Mrs. Margaret Mitchell, coming out of the study. Eu falo como eu quiser. Esta é a minha herança, meu direito. E você está dando para uma estranha e para essa intrometida. I'll talk however I want. This is my inheritance, my right. and you're giving it to a stranger and to this meddler. Joanna não é intrometida. Ela é a única pessoa nesta casa que demonstrou verdadeiro cuidado comigo. Clara is not a meddler. She's the only person in this house who has shown genuine care for me. Cuidado? Ela está manipulando você, não vê? Ela quer o dinheiro. Care? She's manipulating you. Don't you see? She wants the money. Não é sobre dinheiro, Marcelo. É sobre caráter. E você mostrou que não tem nenhum. It's not about money, Christopher. It's about character, and you've shown you have none. Marcelo ficou parado, respirando pesadamente. Christopher stood still, breathing heavily. Seus olhos foram de Dona Helena para Joanna e de volta. His eyes went from Mrs. Margaret Mitchell to Clara and back. Eu não vou aceitar isso, disse ele a voz baixa e perigosa. Não vou deixar você fazer isso. I won't accept this, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I won't let you do this. Você não tem escolha. Dr. Augusto, pode explicar para ele? You have no choice. Dr. Arthur, could you explain it to him? O advogado que tinha ficado quieto até então pigarreou. The lawyer, who had remained quiet until then, cleared his throat. Senhor Marcelo, o testamento é claro e foi feito dentro de todas as normas legais. Sua mãe está em pleno uso de suas faculdades mentais, como pode ser comprovado por 3 médicos independentes que a examinaram. Não há nada que o senhor possa fazer para contestar. Mr. Christopher, the will is clear and was made in full compliance with all legal standards. Your mother is in full possession of her mental faculties, as can be attested by 3 independent doctors who examined her. There is nothing you can do to contest it. Isso não vai ficar assim, disse Marcelo. Ele olhou para Cristina, que tinha aparecido na porta. Vamos embora. This isn't over, said Christopher. He looked at Vanessa, who had appeared at the doorway. Let's go. Marcelo, começou Cristina. Christopher, Vanessa began. Eu disse vamos. I said let's go. Eles saíram batendo a porta. They left, slamming the door. O som do elevador ecoou pelo apartamento, e então, silêncio. The sound of the elevator echoed through the apartment and then silence. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell sat heavily on the sofa. Clara, I think I did everything wrong, she said, tears in her eyes. No, Mrs. Mitchell, you did what you had to do. But he's my son, my only son. And look what he's become. It's not your fault. Everyone is responsible for their own choices. Dr. Arthur Bennett approached. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm sorry to have to say this, but I think we should take precautions. Your son is clearly upset. We could ask for a protective order. No, I don't want to involve the authorities. Not yet. But Mrs. Mitchell, I said no, Dr. Bennett. Christopher isn't going to do anything. He's too cowardly for that. But Mrs. Margaret Mitchell was wrong, because 2 days later, on Thursday morning, when Clara went to wake Mrs. Mitchell for breakfast, she found the bedroom door locked from inside. She knocked. Mrs. Mitchell. Nothing. She knocked harder. Mrs. Mitchell, are you okay? Silence. Clara's heart raced. She ran to her room, grabbed the spare key Mrs. Mitchell had given her and ran back. She opened the door with trembling hands. Mrs. Mitchell was in bed, motionless, pale. On the nightstand beside the bed, there was a half-full glass of water and the medications she took every night. Mrs. Mitchell! Clara ran to her, trying to wake her. Mrs. Mitchell, wake up! She didn't respond. Clara placed her hand on her neck, feeling her pulse. It was there, but weak, very weak. Ethan! She shouted. Ethan, call an ambulance! Quick! The boy appeared at the door, still in pajamas, his eyes wide with fear. What? Call an ambulance. Mrs. Mitchell is sick. Ethan picked up the phone. While he dialed, Clara looked around the room, searching for any clue about what had happened. And then she saw it, the medications. There were more than there should be, much more. She picked up the bottle and counted. There should have been 15 pills left until the end of the month. But the bottle was almost empty. There were only 3. Someone had given Mrs. Mitchell too much medication. On purpose. The ambulance arrived in a few minutes. The paramedics rushed her away. and this time Clara went along. She left Ethan taking care of Mia and asked him not to open the door for anyone. At the hospital, the doctors worked quickly. They performed a gastric lavage, gave her IV fluids, monitored her vital signs. She was lucky, the doctor told Clara hours later. If it had taken any longer, it could have been fatal. But she'll recover. Doctor, she took too much medication, much more than she should have. Yes, that's what we detected. Was it an accident? Clara hesitated. What to say? That she thought someone had tried to harm her on purpose? They would think she was crazy. I don't know, doctor. She lives with me and I take care of her medications. I don't understand how this happened. The doctor made some notes. We're going to have to report this. It's protocol in cases of overdose, even if accidental. Report to whom? The appropriate authorities. Social services will want to talk to you to understand the care situation. Clara nodded, but inside she was panicking. If the authorities got involved, everything would become more complicated. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell woke up a few hours later. She was weak, confused, but alive. Clara? What happened? You took too much medication, Mrs. Mitchell. A lot of medication. She closed her eyes. The pills. I took the ones that were set aside. There were many, but I thought it was because I had forgotten to take them on previous days. You didn't forget, Mrs. Mitchell. Someone put extra pills there. On purpose. Christopher. We don't know that. I know. Who else could it be? Clara had no answer for that. Mrs. Mitchell was hospitalized for 3 days. When she was discharged, she was different, harder, more determined. I'm not going to stay quiet anymore, she said when she returned home. Christopher went too far. What are you going to do? I'm going to do what I should have done from the start. I'm going to confront him. I'm going to tell him I know everything, and I'm going to give him one last chance to do the right thing. Mrs. Mitchell, that's dangerous. No, I know, but there's no other way. I need to look my son in the eye and see if there's still any good left in him. She called Christopher that same day. I need to talk to you. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, here at my house. Christopher tried to argue, but Mrs. Mitchell was firm. It's not a request, Christopher, it's an order. If you don't come, I'll take steps you won't like. He came. He arrived right on time, alone. Vanessa wasn't with him, which was strange. They were always together. Mrs. Mitchell received him in the living room. She asked Clara to stay nearby but out of sight, and once again she asked her to record everything. Christopher, sit down. He sat, but he was clearly uncomfortable. What do you want, Mom? I know everything. Know what? I know about the fake documents. I know about the power of attorney. I know about Nathaniel and the $15,000. I know about the Cayman Islands account. Christopher went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Christopher. I have proof, recordings, documents, everything. And I also know you tried to push me down the stairs. I didn't do that, or no. Then was it Vanessa, or did you hire someone? Mom, you're delusional. And I also know, Mrs. Mitchell continued, her voice growing harder, that you put extra medication in my dose. You tried to kill me, Christopher. Your own son tried to kill me. Christopher stood up. I'm not going to stay here listening to these absurd accusations. Sit down. The order was so firm that he obeyed automatically. I'm going to give you a chance, Christopher. One single chance to redeem yourself. Tell me the truth. The whole truth. Who was involved, how you planned everything, and maybe, just maybe, I won't take this further. There was a long silence. Christopher stared at the floor, his hands trembling. It was Vanessa's idea, he finally said, his voice low. She has debts, a lot of debts. What kind of debts? Gambling. She gambles. Online roulette, betting, that kind of thing. She lost a lot of money, hundreds of thousands, and the guys she owes aren't good people. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed. Because it would show that I can't even control my own wife. He lifted his head and Clara saw tears in his eyes. She convinced me the only way out was to get your money, that it wouldn't make a difference to you, since you had so much, but it would save our lives. And you believed her. I was desperate, Mom. Those guys threatened us. They said they'd do terrible things to Vanessa if she didn't pay. And the fall? Was it you? Christopher shook his head. It was Vanessa. She was in the house, hiding. She had a key she made a copy of earlier. She waited for you to leave your room and pushed. And the medication? That was her too. I swear I didn't know, Mom. When I found out, I argued with her. I told her it had gone too far, but she said it was too late, that it was already done. Mrs. Mitchell was silent for a long moment. Where is Vanessa now? I don't know. She left the house 2 days ago. She said she was going to sort things out with the people she owes. She hasn't come back. Christopher, look at me. He looked. You are my son. I love you. I will always love you. But you have disappointed me in a way I never thought possible. You let your wife push me, poison me, nearly kill me. And you did nothing. Mom, I'm so sorry. Don't interrupt. You're going to listen to what I have to say. I'm not going to report you. I'm not going to take this further. Because you're my son, and because I believe that deep down, very deep down, there's still something good in you. Thank you, Mom. But there are conditions. First, you're going to separate from Vanessa. Now. Immediately. Second, you're going to start therapy. You're going to work through your problems, your weakness, whatever it was that made you think it was acceptable to do what you did. Third, you're going to get a job, a real job, where you work and earn money by your own effort. But Mum, I'm 41 years old. And you've never worked a single day. You've always lived off the allowance your father and I gave you. That ends now. You're going to learn the value of hard-earned money. Christopher looked like a little boy being scolded. It was sad to see, but also necessary. And what about the will? He asked. The will stays as it is. You get your 20%. When I'm gone, you'll have enough money to live well, but not so much that you can waste it. And you'll have to prove you deserve that money, Christopher. You'll have to prove you're a good man. And Teresa, your sister. You have a sister, Christopher, and you're going to meet her. You're going to learn to live with her, to respect her, because she is as much my daughter as you are. Christopher nodded, defeated. Can I ask you something, Mom? Go ahead. Why didn't you tell me about her before? Why did you hide it? Mrs. Margaret Mitchell sighed. Because I was a coward. Because it was easier to pretend it never happened than to face the truth. And because your father didn't want to. He was afraid you'd be jealous, that you'd cause trouble. But he was wrong. I was wrong. And that's why I'm going to correct that mistake now. Christopher stayed a few more minutes, but there was nothing left to say. When he left, he seemed to have aged 10 years. Clara came out of her hiding spot and went to Mrs. Margaret Mitchell. Are you sure you did the right thing? I don't know, Clara. I only know I did what my heart told me. He's my son. I can't just give up on him. But what about Vanessa? She's still out there. She might try something again. That's why I'm going to take precautions. I'm going to hire security. And I'm going to ask Dr. Arthur to start a lawsuit against her. Even if Christopher was weak, she was the one who carried out the acts. She pushed me. She poisoned me. And she will answer for it. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. That helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now continuing, Mrs. Margaret Mitchell kept her word. She hired 2 security guards who took shifts watching the house. And Dr. Arthur began preparing a lawsuit against Vanessa. But Vanessa seemed to have vanished. No one knew where she was. Christopher said she had taken all her things and disappeared without a trace. Meanwhile, life in the house gradually returned to a certain normalcy. Clara continued living there with her children, who had gotten used to the routine. Ethan was helping with small tasks, and Mia had grown attached to Mrs. Margaret Mitchell. In fact, it was Mia who brought a little joy to those difficult days. She spent hours talking with Mrs. Margaret Mitchell, telling stories from school, showing her drawings. You remind me of someone. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell said one day, running her hand through Mia's curly hair. Who? The girl asked. A very special person. Someone I lost, and am now going to find again. Your other daughter. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell smiled. Clara had explained the situation to the children in a simplified way. That's right, my other daughter. When is she coming here? Soon, my love. soon. The meeting between Mrs. Margaret Mitchell and Teresa was set for a Saturday afternoon at the house. Mrs. Margaret Mitchell was more nervous than Clara had ever seen her. "What if she doesn't like me?" she asked, while Clara helped her get ready. "Mrs. Mitchell, she's your daughter. Of course she'll like you." "But I abandoned her, Clara. I let them take her from me. You were young, alone. You had no choice. She'll understand." "I hope so." Teresa arrived promptly at 3 in the afternoon. Clara opened the door and saw a woman in her 50s, brown hair with grey streaks, wearing a simple but elegant outfit. She had the same bright eyes as Mrs. Margaret Mitchell and the same gentle smile. "Hi, I'm Teresa. I came to see—" She hesitated. "I came to see Mrs. Mitchell." "Come in, please. She's waiting." Clara led her to the living room. Mrs. Mitchell was standing by the window, looking outside. When she heard footsteps, she turned. The two women stood still for a moment, just looking at each other, and then Mrs. Mitchell began to cry. "Teresa, my daughter." Teresa also had tears in her eyes. "Mom." They embraced, and Clara discreetly left the room, closing the door behind her. That was their moment, a moment that had been stolen 52 years ago and was now finally happening. They talked for hours. Clara made coffee, brought cakes, but they barely touched anything. They were too busy catching up on lost time. When Teresa finally left, it was already night. But she came back the next day, and the next, and the next. Little by little, Mrs. Mitchell got to know not only her daughter, but also her son-in-law and 3 grandchildren. It was a big, noisy, loving family. Everything she had always wanted but never had with Christopher. Christopher, for his part, was fulfilling the conditions his mother had set. He had started therapy, was looking for a job, and had officially separated from Vanessa. He hadn't met Teresa in person yet, but Mrs. Mitchell hoped that would happen soon. Weeks turned into months. Christmas arrived, and it was a different Christmas. The house was full. Teresa and her family, Clara and her children, even Christopher showed up, shy and clearly uncomfortable, but present. It was during the Christmas dinner that the intercom rang. One of the security guards, who was at the gate, called the house. "Mrs. Mitchell, there's a woman here who wants to talk to you. She says it's urgent." "Who is it?" "She says her name is Vanessa." Silence fell over the room. Everyone looked at Christopher, who had turned pale. "She's here," he whispered. "How?" "Tell her to come up," said Mrs. Mitchell. "Mom, are you sure?" asked Christopher. "Yes. Whatever she wants to say, I need to hear it." Vanessa arrived a few minutes later. She was unrecognizable. Her hair was disheveled, her face thin, her clothes wrinkled. She was nothing like that elegant woman in the red dress who celebrated while the money flew away. She looked around the crowded room, her eyes stopping on each person. "Christopher," she said, her voice broken. He didn't answer. "Mrs. Mitchell," she turned to the older woman. "I need to talk to you. Go ahead. Everyone here already knows what you did." Vanessa seemed to shrink even more. "I came to ask for forgiveness." "Forgiveness?" Mrs. Mitchell's voice was hard. "You pushed me. You poisoned me. You almost killed me. And you want forgiveness?" "I know. I know what I did was terrible, unforgivable, but I was desperate. I was scared." "Scared of what? Of losing the money you threw away?" "It's not just that. I have a problem, Mrs. Mitchell, an addiction. And when you have an addiction, you lose control. You lose your sense of right and wrong. You do things you would never imagine doing." "That doesn't justify anything." "I know. I'm not trying to justify myself. I'm just trying to explain. And to say I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I got help. I'm in treatment now in a support group. I'm trying to recover." Christopher finally spoke. "Vanessa, are you pregnant?" Everyone looked at him, surprised. "How do you know?" she asked. "I know you. I recognize that look. That's why you came back, isn't it? Because you're pregnant and you have nowhere to go." Vanessa started crying. "Yes, I'm 3 months pregnant. And yes, I have nowhere to go. I lost the apartment. I have no money. I'm sleeping at friends' houses. But I didn't come here to ask for money. I came because Because this baby is going to be your grandchild, Mrs. Mitchell, and he's not to blame for anything. He doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes." Silence fell over the room again. Clara was the most shocked. Vanessa pregnant? After everything she had done? Mrs. Margaret Mitchell slowly stood up. "What exactly are you asking me, Vanessa?" "Nothing. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that this baby exists and that he's your family." "And the father?" Vanessa looked at Christopher Mitchell. "He's his. I know you don't believe me, and I don't blame you. But this child is yours, Christopher." Christopher ran his hand over his face. He looked exhausted. "Even if he is, Vanessa, after everything you've done, how can I trust you?" "You can't, and I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm just informing you. The baby is due in June. If you want to be part of his life, I'd like that. If you don't, I'll understand." She turned to leave, but Teresa Ann Higgins, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, spoke. "Wait." Vanessa stopped. "I don't know you," said Teresa. "I don't know the whole story. I don't know everything that happened. But I know what it's like to grow up not knowing who your biological family is. I know the pain that causes, and I don't wish that on any child." "Teresa," began Mrs. Margaret Mitchell. "Let me finish, Mom." Teresa approached Vanessa. "What you did was terrible, unforgivable for many. But a baby can't pay for that. This baby has the right to know his father, to know his grandmother, to be part of this family, even if you don't." Vanessa was openly crying now. "Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, because I'm going to make one thing clear. If you do anything at all to hurt someone in this family again, I will personally make sure you never get near this baby again. Understood?" "Understood." "Good." Teresa looked at Mrs. Margaret Mitchell. "Mom, the decision is yours. But in my opinion, we should give this baby a chance." Mrs. Margaret Mitchell looked around the room. At Teresa, at Christopher, at Clara Marie Miller, at all the faces waiting for her decision. "Vanessa, you will check into a rehabilitation clinic," she said finally. "A good one, where they will properly treat your addiction. And you will stay there until the baby is born. I will cover all the expenses." "Mrs. Margaret Mitchell, I'm not finished. When the baby is born, you will undergo an evaluation. If the professionals think you are fit to care for the child, you can keep him. If not, Christopher will have full custody. Either way, you will have visitation rights as long as you stay clean and in treatment. I accept. I accept all conditions." "Good. Dr. Arthur Bennett will prepare all the documents. And Vanessa, I'm doing this for the baby, not for you. Don't forget that." "I won't forget, I promise." Vanessa left shortly after, but this time there was something different about her. Maybe hope, or maybe just the relief of no longer being alone. Christopher approached his mother. "Thank you, Mom, for giving this another chance. Don't thank me. I'm just doing what I think is right. And Christopher, you need to prepare to be a father. A real father, present, responsible, not the way you were a son. I know, and I'll try. I'll do better." Mrs. Margaret Mitchell touched his face. "I hope so, my son. I hope so." The following months were an emotional roller coaster. Vanessa was admitted to the clinic that Mrs. Margaret Mitchell paid for, one of the best in the state. There she received treatment not only for her gambling addiction, but also for the deeper emotional issues that had led to the addiction. Christopher visited her once a week. At first he went alone, but then he started bringing Mrs. Margaret Mitchell. They were difficult visits, filled with uncomfortable silences and unspoken matters, but necessary. Teresa became a constant presence in the house. She and Mrs. Margaret Mitchell developed a beautiful relationship, reclaiming pieces of the time they had lost. Teresa brought childhood photos, told stories about the family that had adopted her, shared memories, and Teresa and Christopher finally got to know each other. It was strange at first. Two middle-aged siblings meeting for the first time, with no shared history, no childhood memories. But little by little they built something new. Christopher discovered that Teresa enjoyed chess, just like he did. They started playing together on Saturdays. She discovered that he knew how to fix things, and she asked for his help with small repairs around her house. It wasn't the perfect sibling relationship. They didn't have decades of shared experiences to support it. But it was a beginning, and it was real. Clara continued working at the house, but now it was different. She wasn't just the housekeeper anymore. She was part of the family in a strange but genuine way. Her children grew up there. Ethan passed the medical school entrance exam, and Mia was doing well in school. And Mrs. Margaret Mitchell, for the first time in many years, was happy. She had her daughter back. She was rebuilding her relationship with her son. She had a grandchild on the way, and she had people around her who genuinely cared about her. In June, as expected, the baby was born. A healthy boy weighing 7.5 pounds, who was named Caleb James, in honor of the love Mrs. Margaret had lost so many years ago. Vanessa had made great progress in her treatment. The therapist confirmed that she was capable of caring for the baby, as long as she continued with follow-up care. She didn't move back in with Christopher, but they established a shared custody agreement. It was on a sunny Sunday, a few months after Caleb James was born, that the whole family gathered again at Mrs. Margaret's house. Teresa and her family, Christopher with the baby, Vanessa, Clara and her children, even Dr. Arthur Bennett showed up. Mrs. Margaret had an announcement to make. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she began. "The last few months have been difficult, but they've also been the most meaningful of my life. I've learned a lot about family, about forgiveness, about second chances." She looked around at all those people who, in one way or another, had become her family. "So, I've decided to make a change. I'm going to sell this house." A murmur of surprise went through the room. "Don't worry, I'm not going to leave you without a place. Actually, I'm going to do something I should have done a long time ago. I'm going to use the money from the sale, along with part of my investments, to open a business. An inn." "An inn?" asked Christopher, surprised. "Yes, in Galena. I've always loved that town, and I think it would be perfect. A place where families can stay, make memories together. And it won't just be my business. It will be ours." She looked at Teresa. "Teresa, you have management experience. I want you to be the general manager. Mom, I don't know if you can do it. I trust you." Then she looked at Christopher. "Christopher, you've always been good with numbers, with planning. I want you to handle the finances." "It would be an honor, Mom." "And Clara," said Mrs. Margaret, taking her hand, "you will be my partner. A minority partner, but a partner, because none of this would be possible without you." Clara was crying. "Mrs. Margaret, I can't accept—" "Yes, you can. You deserve it. You risked everything to protect me, to do the right thing, and I will never forget that." "And me?" asked Vanessa, her voice small. "Is there a place for me in this?" Mrs. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "That depends on you, Vanessa. If you continue your treatment, if you prove that you've truly changed, then maybe there will be a place. But you're going to have to earn it. It won't be given to you for free." "I will earn it, I promise." "Then it's decided," said Mrs. Margaret, smiling. "We're going to open the Gathering Inn, because that's what happened here. Gatherings, reunions, people finding each other after years apart, people finding themselves, people finding forgiveness and redemption." And that's what they did. In the following months, they sold the house in Chicago, bought a beautiful property in Galena, and began the renovations. The whole family got involved. Teresa coordinated the project. Christopher handled the numbers. Clara supervised the cleaning and organizing crew. Even Vanessa helped out, doing small tasks while looking after Caleb James. It wasn't easy. There were fights, misunderstandings, moments when it seemed like everything would fall apart. But in the end, they made it. The Gathering Inn opened its doors on a spring morning, 1 year after that unforgettable Christmas. It was a beautiful place, with 10 cozy rooms, a blooming garden, a small but charming pool. And more importantly, it was a place full of love, of stories, of second chances. At the opening ceremony, with everyone gathered there, Mrs. Margaret Mitchell raised a toast. "To family," she said, lifting her glass. "Not necessarily blood family, but the family we choose, The family we build with love, forgiveness, and hope. To the family that accepts our flaws and helps us become better. To family, everyone repeated. And there, in that moment, looking around and seeing all those people who had been through so much together, Clara realized she had been part of something extraordinary. She had seen the darkness of greed, but she had also seen the light of forgiveness. She had seen the pain of betrayal, but also the healing of redemption. She had seen a family fall apart and rebuild, stronger than before. And as the sun shone over Galena, she knew that no matter how difficult the path had been, every second had been worth it. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're following along from. Leave in the comments what you felt during this journey. Do you think Mrs. Margaret Mitchell made the right decision by giving all those chances? We'd love to hear your honest opinion. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories that will touch your heart.